Okay, so welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to a brand new video, and this is a video I've been anticipating to make for a few weeks now, ever since James Gunn revealed right before the release of Superman that there would be a metahuman mural in the Hall of Justice that he was looking forward to releasing official images to the public sometime after release. And here we are, baby, so apologies this took a little while to get to, but let's dive into this, as honestly, I've got quite a lot of thoughts about this. This is the Hall of Justice, and it's literally a mural detailing some of the most notable metahuman history, canonical history even, of the DCU. Now, having said that, I guess at the end of the day, this mural was sanctioned by Maxwell Lord, so there can be an argument made that there were other popular heroes of note that weren't included, and that's something I also really want to get into. Not only like a breakdown of the heroes featured on the mural and how they could impact the DCU, but also the lack of certain popular DCU heroes that I think some of us are kind of shocked aren't even on there, and what that could mean. So probably going to be a long video. We've got 23 characters to get into, so strap yourselves in as there's quite a bit to discuss here. Please leave a like rating on the video to help support the channel, and absolutely consider subscribing if you're a fan of DC, as we cover a ton of that here. Now, one more thing that's important for me to mention is what James Gunn said about a couple of characters from this mural, and where he says, "I will just say that in one of our scripts we're working on, two of those characters are kind of important." And so we can kind of get into who those characters might be that could very well appear in one of these scripts, well, into live action. But first up, we have Sister Symmetry. So Sister Symmetry is an interesting one, as she's a very powerful sorceress that many of you may actually know underneath the cloak as Madame Xanadu, with her real name being Nimue or Nimue Emudu. I probably could have butchered some pronunciations here, but Madame Xanadu goes all the way back to Arthurian legends in the comics as a sister of Morgana, which of course, with adaptations not copied and pasting, we don't truly know if in the DCU's canon if this is going to be the case, but I've always thought that even though Gunn has stated, on the broad spectrum here of this whole video, that metahumans have been around for 300 years, to me, 300 years ago is where they were probably a lot more publicly noticeable, and from there on out, their public personas grew in popularity more and more. But of course, like, everything points to the direction of superpowered beings of all kinds of descriptions having been around a lot longer than that. So with Nimue, or Madame X's Sister Symmetry here, it wouldn't remotely surprise me if she does go back a lot further than 300 years. I mean, just think about how we are meant to be getting Paradise Lost with the Amazons, the gods, Circe, the witch, so on, so forth. Like, that goes back a lot more than 300 years. But back on point here, like, Sister Symmetry isn't technically outright Madame Xanadu, as she becomes Sister Symmetry upon wearing the Cloak of Kyra, which is an artifact of the Lords of Order. So, as I'm sure many of you are familiar with Dr. Fate, and how his helmet, which was crafted by one of the Lords of Order, Nabu, and thus imbues him with his abilities, the Cloak of Kyra allows Madame Xanadu to be the host of Sister Symmetry when equipped. The cloak, as you can imagine, since it's from the Lords of Order, gave her a whole wheelhouse of pretty crazy magical powers. So would I like to see her pop up in the DCU? Like, sure, like, she's one of the characters that could really pop up, whether it's a prequel project or something more towards present day. So up next at number 2 is the Silent Knight. So Silent Knight, real name Brian Kent, is a superhero knight going all the way back to the bloody 6th century, representing your boy's home country, England. So once again here, all while I want to emphasize that Gunn may adapt things differently in the DCU when it comes to the exact setting of these characters, not to mention just because, there's all of these characters on the mural, it doesn't mean that we're going to see every single one of them used in live action or animation. but it is yet another character used that goes back far longer than 300 years ago, as he is another character right next to Sister Symmetry who lived during the time of King Arthur. Now, another interesting aspect of this character is that in the Hawkman series in the 1990s, Brian Kent's Silver Knight was revealed to be one of the previous avatars for the Hawk God, like with a retcon in the 2000s implying that he is a past life of Carter Hall, who of course we know as Hawkman. So you can see on the panels on the screen, for example, how Hawkman is seeing all of the ghosts of their past lives, and Silent Night is among them. Again, as I keep saying here on the channel, adaptations don't copy and paste, so it doesn't mean that, you know, that is going to carry over or be an absolute guarantee for the DCU. But there are kind of some roots in how even Brian Kent is implied to be an ancestor of Jonathan Kent, which is kind of nuts. And I don't think that would be translated over to the DCU's canonical history. But I think it would be pretty cool to maintain the lore of Silent Night being a previous life of Carter Hall's. And, you know, we've already got Hawkgirl in the DCU, so who knows where the heck Hawkman is now, but here's a possible past version of him. And I don't think, like, Silent Night had any particular crazy superpowers from what I've looked into, other than just being a badass knight. However, if they do maintain him being one of the past lives of Hawkman, then, you know, I think it stands to reason that you can imagine he would have had a lot of the powers that kind of come with that. And to be honest, there is still a whole lot to learn about Gunn's take on Hawkman and even Isabella Merced's Hawkgirl. As after all, as well, like in the DCU, Kendra Saunders is indeed a reincarnation of a Thanagarian warrior. So maybe they could just weave in a similar thing to Silent Night throughout the ages. Now, up next at number 3 is Exoristos. So Exoristos was an Amazon, of course, from Themyscira. However, she was exiled from Themyscira for a reason that I don't think we exactly know of, but ever since her exile, she wandered the world for many hundreds of years, which would make sense as to why she appears in this mural, as she could have effectively, the way I see it in some ways, could have been a somewhat Wonder Woman to the world before Diana herself came along as Wonder Woman. And that's the thing, like Wonder Woman herself isn't on the mural, which on my knee-jerk reaction of seeing these official images, I found to be pretty odd because, you know, it's fairly safe to assume that Wonder Woman was born a long time ago. And I know it changes from iteration to iteration, but she's likely a couple of thousand years old. I mean, I know that Gunn can play with this, but I just can't imagine that they would mess around with that too much. Now, of course, we know that Wonder Woman didn't leave Themyscira right away, but she's usually active and known to the people of Earth to some extent in the 20th century. But given that this metahuman mural is detailing what we can reasonably say are the standout heroes of the DCU's history, I think that she should have probably have been featured on there somewhere, perhaps around the portion that appears to be around the 20th century. But I guess an argument can be made that she did leave Themyscira, but her acts as a hero weren't famously recorded. And with the movie being written right now by Ana Nogueira, maybe Gunn can get into that, and perhaps the most famous recorded times are still yet to come in the 21st century, present day DCU alongside Batman and Superman. But either way, we do indeed have an exiled Amazon on the mural, and I find this pretty cool because, as I said, she feels basically to me like a Wonder Woman who did help out a long time ago, could even still be around, and what's also really cool to consider is taking into account what Gunn mentioned. So to repeat that again, I would just say that in one of our scripts we're working on, 2 of those characters are kind of important. So maybe like one of those characters is like Maxwell Lord, as we know Sean Gunn will be appearing again, and more on Maxwell Lord later. But with us knowing that Gunn is using 2 of those characters in one of the scripts, it would be pretty cool if the other one was us seeing how Exoristos got exiled from Themyscira in the DCU project Paradise Lost. We can't forget that we do know Paradise Lost is still cooking in the background and actively being worked on, with Gunn even saying not too long ago that it's moving along. And Gunn said in the announcement way back in January 2023 that it does indeed take place before the birth of Wonder Woman, and it surrounds the political intrigue behind the Society of Women. Like, how did that all come about? What's the beautiful truths and the ugly truths behind all of that? And what's the scheming like between all the power players in that society? Well, maybe the fallout of events of Paradise Lost could lead to this character being exiled. Like, honestly, we're just gonna have to wait and see, but I couldn't help from really getting into that, because I think that's kind of a cool idea, but you would have to let me know. Now, up next at number 4 is Black Pirate. So Black Pirate, real name John Valor, was a privateer who upheld justice for the king by encountering and defeating many pirates on the seas back in the 16th century. Now, this is a character that goes all the way back to Action Comics in 1940. He's also had some other pretty wild adventures, such as being ripped out of his time and becoming a part of the team known as the Five Warriors from Forever, which was a team made up of other heroes also from different eras in time. That also included Jonah Hex and Miss Liberty. Now, I believe eventually after his death, he became a ghost, and in his ghost form went on to help Jack Knight, the son of Starman. So, all in all, Black Pirate isn't like a crazy powerful metahuman, but clearly notable enough in the DCU, or as we went over earlier, notable enough to Maxwell Lord to put on his Hall of Justice metahuman mural. So next up at number 5, who we just kind of briefly mentioned, is Miss Liberty. So Miss Liberty, also known as Bess Lynn, goes back to the American Revolutionary War. I believe she was a nurse during the American Revolution, but also through her experience at the time, she became inspired to become Miss Liberty and fought against European invaders. Now, she didn't have, I believe, any powers other than just being really proficient at hand-to-hand combat and her skill as a horsewoman. So you could kind of look at her as like a badass vigilante riding a horse at the time. But other than that, I believe she is the ancestor of Liberty Belle, who's also featured on this mural. And it seems that her efforts during her time earned her this spot on the Hall of Justice metahuman mural just in her honor. But up next at number 6 is quite an interesting one, as he appears twice on the metahuman mural under, I guess, 2 different aliases. So his first appearance on the mural is as Whirlwind, who many of us know more as Max Mercury. So, as many of you know, Max Mercury, or shall I say Whirlwind right now, at this point in the mural is indeed a speedster. And for those of you who don't know, like, he goes all the way back to the 19th century. So even though the Speed Force is like a fairly complicated thing to talk about, given that it's this extra dimensional force that echoes throughout all of space-time, and depending on the iteration, such as, I guess, Flash Rebirth, it's like, does it technically originate from Barry Allen, which then as a result echoed throughout all of time to power up even those that came before him, which then, even though Max Mercury, would have clearly have tapped into the Speed Force during the 19th century, it may have not technically started with him. Either way, before going too deep down that rabbit hole, yes, like, this means the DCU has recognized canonically a literal speedster here, and I really love that. I know it's not much, but it's still kind of just cool seeing this. Oh, look, speedster. Now, his powers were granted to him by a dying Indian shaman, and he wasn't as fast as some of the other speedsters that we know in the Flash family. Now, Maxwell Crandall has had quite a wild life, as any speedster does, as after he got his powers, he went from the name Windrunner to traveling in time and ending up in the 1890s and creating the new name of Whirlwind, which we see him at this point on the metahuman mural. He then traveled to the 1930s and 40s as, I'm pretty sure, as Quicksilver, and helped mentor Jay Garrick's Flash. And then, of course, he eventually settled on the name Max Mercury. So I think it's easy for me to say that it would be so awesome to see this character in some DCU project or another, as I feel like he's a really good candidate who could just pop up here and there. It's not exactly like digging into Barry Allen's Flash or anything like that, which Gunn has admitted that they won't really lean into for a few years, but showing another speedster who's time traveled and could easily kind of pop up in some kind of project for a cool arc, I could see that working really well. So at number 7, we have Super Chief. So as for Flying Stag, or the name Super Chief, which is, a legacy name also held by others in DC, he's shown to be shortly after Miss Liberty and Whip Whirlwind on the Mural. And as we've established with their dates roughly on the chronology of the Metahuman Mural, Miss Liberty was clearly around in the American Revolution. Yet Flying Stag Super Chief was a member of the Wolf Clan, I believe, in the 15th century as their best warrior of the Iroquois. Now, obviously, I don't think it really matters given that this period of history was still very much so steeped in conflict that he would have defended his people against. His superhuman abilities came from an amulet which he crafted from a meteorite sent from Manitou, but he only gained his abilities for 1 hour at a time. And then for number 8, we have El Diablo, and, there's a few other characters in DC that go by the name of El Diablo, and we actually saw the Chateau Zatanna version in David Ayer's Suicide Squad. But this one is Lazarus Lane's El Diablo, and he was the original and a vigilante in the 19th century Old West. Now, after he was nearly killed by a gang of thieves, I believe he was revived by a shaman known as Wise Owl. Now, after this, he was actually cursed to be the host of a demon, which acted as this somewhat spirit of vengeance. So he has these abilities, I guess you could say, but they're only accessed when he's unconscious. Now, the 9th character is the only one out of all of the characters on the Metahuman Mural that I've seen debated a little bit, as the depiction on the mural kind of makes it seem like it could be one of a few candidates. So some are saying that this is Iron Monroe or his father Hugo Danner, the gladiator, with some even saying Richard Dragon, which I don't really think lines up with the chronology of the timeline of the mural. Overall, I think most are leaning towards Hugo Danner, who has an interesting history in the comics, as he didn't even originate with DC, but rather goes all the way back to Philip Wiley's 1930s Gladiator novel, which went on to really influence some of the most popular superheroes, such as Superman, even referenced by Jerry Siegel. Now, DC's history of Hugo Danner, despite being Iron Monroe's father, as I understand it here, when looking more into the character, he wasn't exactly super heroic, as, again, from what I understand, he wanted to usher in a new age and race of superhumans known as the Sons of Dawn, with his formula, and allow them to conquer the world. Either way, if this is indeed Hugo Danner on the mural, I can just imagine that Gunn would be aiming to model him after the Gladiator novel as this early metahuman of the DCU where he just used his powers for good. So number 10 is the Ghost of Flanders. So similarly to what we were speculating about with the previous character and just kind of where things are getting to timeline-wise on the mural, Ghost of Flanders was a crime fighter during World War II. And after a battle during the war, he had survived, but was actually reported dead, and he had been honored as the unknown soldier at a tomb in Washington. So he never really made it known that he actually survived, and instead used this opportunity to make that tomb his base of operations for his vigilante activities. Now, he didn't really have any powers, but he was skilled at hand-to-hand combat and also piloting planes. Anyway, though, at number 11 is none other than Wesley Dodds, known as Sandman. Not to be mistaken for the Sandman that we have over on Netflix recently, having recently released season 2. However, there are actually links to Dream, the Sandman himself, and Wesley Dodds' Sandman. So Wesley Dodds became Sandman pre-Crisis, I believe, after having a bunch of nightmares of crime, and, this motivated him to create a lab and where he used his resources to develop these chemicals and gases that, induced people into sleep and hypnosis. And he went out there, essentially, and used his alias of the Sandman to hunt down criminals who haunted his dreams. But I really like how his origin was sort of retconned to fit in with Dream of the Endless from the Sandman comics. So for those of you who may be familiar familiar with this, or even if you aren't, when Dream of the Endless, Morpheus, was imprisoned by Roderick Burgess for just over around 100 years, since he couldn't fulfill his function as Dream of the Endless, this led to Wesley Dodds somewhat filling this void left by Dream, almost on this unconscious level, if you will, which still kind of gave him these prophetic dreams of criminals, but because Morpheus also appeared in his dreams, this, as a result, kind of also inspired his look with his gas mask, for example. Now, another cool thing about Wesley Dodds' Sandman is that, yes, he was one of the original members of the JSA, the Justice Society of America, and we have a couple of other characters on the mural who were involved with the JSA, and you guys know how excited I get when it comes to speculation of the JSA in the DCU, whether, you know, that's a prequel project, but again, more on that later, because we have to talk about number 12 now, and we have Amazing Man. So Amazing Man is a mantle that has also been passed down to a couple of other characters in DC, but Will Everett's Amazing Man was the original, and yet another hero active during World War II. So his origins are tied to none other than Ultra Humanite. So when some equipment Ultra Humanite developed exploded and caused Will Everett to, you know, be involved in this accident, he gained these abilities to mimic the properties of whatever he touched. Now, as a side note here, talking about all of this and these characters on the mural so far, especially the ones at this period in time on the mural, knowing that apparently Sergeant Rock is still moving along according to James Gunn, it does make me wonder if characters featured around this point of the mural could possibly pop up in that script. You know, I could easily imagine a live-action GI robot and Sergeant Rock being featured, but as we've always speculated on the channel with the DCU's history, you could easily kind of pepper in some other characters like this. Not that you should necessarily take away from the fact that this is a Sergeant Rock movie about Sergeant Rock, but when Sergeant Rock is in the DC universe, which had all kinds of characters like this going around at that point in time, I just wouldn't rule anything like this out. So 13th, of course, is Zatara the Magician. So many of you know Giovanni Zatara as Zatanna's father. He was a stage magician who was also an authentic sorcerer who used his powers, of course, to fight crime. Yet again, another hero active during World War II. Although he isn't like a core member of the JSA, I believe he did pop up in some of their Golden Age stories in the 90s, but either way here, with Zatara, he is insanely powerful, and I would love to see him in live action if we ever got more projects in the past. But regardless, seeing Zatara, Giovanni Zatara here on the mural, I think does imply good things for one day seeing Zatanna in the present day DCU. Now, 14th is Liberty Belle. So Libby Lawrence, Liberty Belle, was yet another hero during World War II, and of course, she has been a part of the JSA, which is something I'll definitely jump on whenever I get the chance. She's also notably been a part of the All-Star Squadron, which was a team of heroes assembled by the government during World War II, which also included Amazing Man, among quite a few others. Now, her powers of enhanced strength and speed came from literally ringing the Liberty Bell, which also resonated with her own bell-shaped medal that she got quite a long time ago, which was made from a piece of the original Liberty Bell. She was also married to the speedster Johnny Quick, and speaking of, in the 40s, she helped Sergeant Rock. So again, I don't want to get too crazy with theories, but many people ask, like, why Sergeant Rock? Why are we getting a Sergeant Rock movie? Who cares about a Sergeant Rock movie? And now, after seeing this metahuman mural with these characters, it just does make me, I can't help but delve further into the theory that we could see characters like this pop up to assist Sergeant Rock and his mission in whatever the plot is, and I think that would be so freaking awesome. Now at number 15, we have a couple of characters here, so Bulletman and Bulletgirl. So Bulletman and Bulletgirl were a superhero duo. Jim Barr, I believe you pronounce it, is Bulletman, and after losing his father, who was a police officer, he was also inspired to fight crime. Now, Susan Kent's Bulletgirl is his wife, who also fought crime during the war with her husband. Now, they both actually gained powers from Bulletman's invention of the crime cure serum, which gave him enhanced strength, as well as both having a helmet constructed by Jim, which allowed them to have pretty crazy powers, like flying, the ability to deflect bullets, and their strength was such that they could even kind of smash tanks. So again, as I keep pointing out here, that would be pretty awesome to see in Sergeant Rock. Now, I'm not saying every one of these bloody characters could feature in Sergeant Rock, but you know, there's a lot that they could play with here, and they were both also members of the All-Star Squadron. Now, at number 16, as I mentioned earlier, we see Max Mercury pop up again. Now, this would be when he went from Whip Whirlwind to taking the name of, and look, also the look of Max Mercury, as he features like 2 different looks in the mural. Now, at number 17, we have TNT and Dan the Dyna-Mite. So, Texas TNT was a superhero also from World War II, and Dan the Dyna-Mite was his sidekick and actually student. Now, they gained radioactive powers from working with, I believe, these radioactive salts, which resulted in Thomas generating heat energy, while Dan generated electric energy to use in their crime fighting. Now, they both crafted a pair of rings, which allows their energy to lie dormant until their rings touch together. And also, in addition to the energy they produce, they have super freaking strength and enhanced speed. And they both have also been members of the All-Star Squadron, as well as the 7 Soldiers of Victory. And then at number 18, we have Phantom Lady. It makes sense for this to be the Golden Age version of the character, Sandra Knight, who was the first Phantom Lady. She was also a member of the All-Star Squadron. And now, you know, come to think of it, with the amount of members we've seen featured on this mural from the All-Star Squadron, in addition to something like the prequel DCU Sergeant Rock movie, it would be pretty damn cool to have a DCU prequel World War II movie about an adventure with the All-Star Squadron. Like, who knows exactly what the lineup of characters would be, but I could easily imagine that as well. Like, I'd still prefer a JSA prequel, but with the characters featured on the mural being more All-Star Squadron related rather than JSA related, I'd still be absolutely down for that. Like, I would take that if I couldn't get JSA right away. Now, an interesting thing about Sandra Knight is that she is the cousin of Ted Knight, the original Starman, who I would have loved to have seen featured on the mural, and I still don't really get why we haven't had that. Now, she used a device known as the Black Light Ray, which gave her the ability to make herself invisible, but also kind of blind her opponents. Up next at number 19, we have the Atomic Knight, who just looks freaking awesome. And Gardner Grail he's an interesting character because originally the Atomic Knights were a band of heroes that first appeared in Strange Adventures in the 1960s. And I believe they originally protected the post-apocalyptic future of 1992. But given where he's at in the mural's history, like right next to Phantom Lady, who was around during World War II, I can imagine that the DCU's iteration of Atomic Knight could go back to the origin of how early on he was selected to be involved in a simulation run by Star Labs to just kind of see how a soldier would respond to the post-nuclear world, which gave him these adventures of being a hero in that setting, which I believe actually nicely incorporated the original adventures of the Atomic Knights. But by the end of it, he broke out of that simulation of those adventures he had, with even these precognitive abilities that gave him visions of threats that could come to fruition in the future. And so this motivated him to use the awesome plated energy-resistant suit, which Star Labs had actually recreated for a post-nuclear world, and he just kind of worked to prevent his visions from coming to life by maintaining peace and order in the world. And that's just kind of likely how we see him on the mural. But I would actually really dig seeing Atomic Knight in live action with just how metal like this character is, like the armor and everything that comes with his character in the source material. So at number 20, we have Freedom Beast. So Freedom Beast is a South African superhero who has access to the red, and his abilities allow him to control animals and merge animals with this kind of ability of biofusion to create entirely new forms of them to help aid him on his adventures. He's also the successor of Buana Beast, and he uses the same elixir and helmet that allows him him to access these powers. Now, what I find really cool about this is that we actually saw him featured in the live-action DC Titan series, where we finally got that episode, some of you may remember, that delved into Beast Boy's connection with the Red. And Freedom Beast kind of acted as this, you know, essentially helped induct Gar into that world with all of his expertise, and that was just like an awesome thing to see play out. Then, of course, at number 21, we have Wildcat. So seeing Wildcat is fantastic. Like, many of you know that he's a member of the JSA, and I really hope that we see him one day in the DCU. Now, from where he's at in the timeline, he's interestingly, like, seems to be around in roughly the 80s of the DCU, which would make sense as he's right at the very end of the mural, approaching the present day with the Lord Tech building in the background. Now, I do have to admit, I still have all kinds of questions here, just like how I already got across earlier. I'm kind of surprised that we don't just kind of have an outright section of the JSA, including Jay Garrick to Hourman, in addition to Wildcat here, among others, just standing together around the time of World War II on the mural. And yet we see Ted Grant somewhat separately getting towards present day. So it's like, I don't know really what's going on here. I mean, I do want to say at the same time, it doesn't mean that he wasn't a member of the JSA in the past. Like, for all we know, like, they can incorporate how Ted Grant could be aging slowly due to, like, previous adventures with the JSA interacting with shadow energy. So I think a lot is still on the table there, despite showing Wildcat by himself in a 80s-esque kind of setting. And obviously, like, featuring him by himself doesn't mean that he wasn't also associated with other metahumans, such as, you know, the other metahumans of the JSA. But I'm still kind of left wondering why the mural doesn't feature others like Jay Garrick on there. Because, you know, like, why not? Maybe Maxwell Lord didn't care for them. Now at number 22, we have Vibe. So this is Cisco Ramon, or originally Paco Ramon, I believe. And as many of you are familiar with from Cisco Ramon, who was Vibe on the Flash TV series, he was a superhero who utilized sonic powers that, you know, create sound waves which could do some serious damage. It's quite interesting to see how close he is to the present day DCU, but I have no idea if we're going to see him anytime soon. Now, at number 23, we have Gunfire. So Andrew Van Horn's Gunfire origin goes back to the Bloodlines crossover, and where he's actually attacked by an alien parasite, and after surviving that, he has the ability to manipulate kinetic energy. Like, clearly at the same time, he utilizes guns and has kind of a bit of a Deathstroke-esque vibe and look to him, but his abilities allow him to, whenever he touches an object, it can charge the particles to emit an energy that fires projectiles, likened to that of a gun, before it disintegrates. Now, he became one of the new bloods that came out of the Bloodlines crossover, which is a few characters whose metagenes were activated by those parasites. But lastly, we need to talk about what appears to be the final character here, Maxwell Lord himself, standing in front of the Lord Tech building. So initially, from when we were all watching Superman in the theaters, at a distance, it kind of looked to perhaps be Dr. Fate with the somewhat gold thing in his hand, appearing as maybe the Dr. Fate helmet. But now the image has released, it is Maxwell Lord, because, I mean, the dude is literally standing in front of the Lord Tech building at the point of the mural that is also the present-day DCU in the chronology of metahuman appearances. Not to mention, guys, to seal the deal here, so to speak, when posting the images, none other than Sean Gunn himself posted, who's that guy? With Gunn liking his comment. Then you get a few fans saying, my same question, Mr. Lord, and whatnot with some other posts, with the only other response that Gunn interacted with by liking the post, saying in response to the original one, like, who's the guy at the end, saying Maxwell Lord being an egotistical guy, I think, putting himself at the present in the history of heroes. So yeah, like, with Sean Gunn himself saying, who's the last guy, and Gunn literally liking a reply, saying that it's Maxwell Lord. Yes, this is Maxwell Lord putting himself into the mural, which kind of would fit with his character, to be honest, especially the version that Gunn seems to be going with in the DCU. So after a lot of rambling there, that concludes all 24 characters on the Metahuman mural. You guys know my thoughts by now. Like, I appreciate some of the deeper dives of these characters, and some of them are pretty damn cool, and I even see, as I've mentioned, a possibility of a project or two coming out of it, or just some of these characters being utilized, whether it's in Paradise Lost, whether it's in Sergeant Rock, or whether there's a possibility of an all-star squadron kind of project. You know, there is a lot to play with there, but I do... Again, it's hard to talk about this when you know that this is in the Hall of Justice, funded by Maxwell Lord. So it doesn't necessarily, like, this isn't the be-all and end-all of DCU history as some of us was expecting this mural to be, because it's literally, you know, ordered by him. He put himself in the mural. He selected which characters should be in that. It's not like it was divinely dictated who would be painted onto that mural. That was chosen by the main man himself, the head of the Justice Gang, Maxwell Lord. So with that being said, you know, as much as I kind of want to whine about the lack of heroes of Jay Garrick, Stargirl, Hourman, to whoever else, that doesn't mean that they've not been out there and could even be referenced or appear one day in the DCU. But I'm going to shut up now, so let me know your thoughts about everything I had to say and everything we know about all of the DC heroes on the Metahuman mural. I know we're calling it a Metahuman mural, but they're technically not all Metahumans, but I know kind of Gunn threw into contention what technically defines a metahuman, but we don't need to go down that rabbit hole. Let me know your thoughts, ladies and gentlemen. I'd really appreciate it if you left a like rating on this video, because videos like this, with the amount of rambling I do, take ages to edit. Share it around. Subscribe if you're brand new here, because again, evidently we cover a lot of DC, but I'm gonna love you and leave you. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see all of you guys in the next video. Goodbye.